This is Scott Becker with the Becker Private Equity and Business Podcast and the Becker Business Minute Podcast. We're thrilled for you to join us today. Here are 11 of the stories that we're following this morning, February 23rd, 2023. Thank you for listening. First, futures point up today after an awful last week in the markets. Yesterday, the Dow and the S&P were down. The Nasdaq barely squeaked out a gain, but see the Wall Street Journal today, stock futures rise after a 4-day sell-off for the S&P 500. That's sort of the story of the last week. It's been a really down week. Hopefully back up a little bit today. Second, Nvidia, the chip maker, reported great results for the first quarter. This is of news, particularly because one, Nvidia has become such a huge chip maker. Two, because their results were sort of against the grain of the rest of the chip market. Everybody else seemed to get hurt in the chip market. They had a good quarter. Their stock's up 6% today, at least after hours. It was, it'll probably be up that today. Third, a great piece by Brian Sosi of Yahoo Finance on Jeff Gundlach. Jeff Gundlach is the leader of Double Line. He's considered the bond king, sort of a role that used to be held by somebody else. He basically says, from a daunting perspective, here comes the hard economic landing. Basically says, at some point with the interest rates going up, the inflation not going down as much as it should, that we're going to have at some point a hardcore recession. So we'll see what happens there. Fourth, a similar story in Market Watch. No soft landing is in the cards from Fed rate hikes. Again, a similar perspective that sooner or later you're going to have a hard landing if the Fed keeps on having to raise rates to fight inflation. Fifth, the Fed faces a very daunting task in fighting inflation and using rate hikes to fight them, to fight inflation. The borrowing costs as they rise are crushing to businesses, to families, and the government, just the higher interest rates. At the same time, the Fed's hands are sort of tied because as the U.S. government keeps on printing money, the Fed's only defense is to raise rates to try and fight that and fight inflation. Sort of a very daunting and challenging spot. Sooner or later, the Fed's got to slow on the raising of rates. The Fed's got to slow on the raising of rates, but they can't do that until the government slows on their deficit spending. A really fascinating situation here. They can't seem to get inflation as under control as they'd like to. And that's why all these people are calling for sort of a hard landing is what you're seeing. Sixth, jobless claims came in pretty low this week at 192,000. That's a good week. That's very positive from a job market perspective. It's, again, daunting from a Fed perspective. You use that as a reason to keep on having to raise rates. Eighth, you've got this fascinating situation going on in Russia and Ukraine, where it's starting to look more like a World War III scenario. As the U.S. and the West back Ukraine very heavily, China backs Russia very heavily, increasingly. China's buying Russia's oil. China's supplying supposedly arms to Russia. So you've got this situation where sooner or later you've got to get constructive engagement from world leaders to try and bring this into a better spot. Right now it looks like really a debacle with what you're seeing there as this emerges and escalates between Russia and Ukraine, and both sides have their backers. It leads to a very sort of scary situation. 10th, just finished a fascinating book about sort of some of the Redstone, Viacom, CBS, called Unscripted, The Epic Battle for a Media Empire and the Redstone Family Legacy. This is by James Stewart, brilliant author, and Rachel Abrams. A great read. Listen, it talks about sort of the Redstones and Viacom CBS and how that came to be. Also, Les Moonves, who was the brilliant leader of CBS for so long, but ended up with a horrible record of sexual sort of misbehavior, Me Too type of behavior, horrible behavior. Finally, last today, a quick shout out to Greg Fahlberg and Mark Aberson. One of the things that's fascinating in business or in sports and anything is people that have evolved and made themselves great in something, that they've worked hard at it, they've put energy in, they put perseverance in. To me, it's particularly exciting to watch as people get into sort of maybe the second half of life, middle age, whatever you're going to call it, and they're still working to get better at stuff. Today's business shout out, and we'll have a separate podcast on this, goes to both Greg Fahlberg and Mark Aberson, who've made tremendous efforts, who've gone from sort of like perennial sort of like middle round picks in whatever they're doing to first round picks. It's been great to watch, and it's a great testament to the fact that you could still get better at stuff as you get older. And we believe in the concept of never stop learning. These two have hit it right on the right, nailed it, both Greg Fahlberg and Mark Abrahamson. Thank you for listening today to the Becker Private Equity and Business Minute Podcast. Thank you very much for listening.